and the International Labour Organization's Global Commission on the Future Work and their report. The future work has always changed, but the pace that we see now in technology, demographic changes, climate change, geopolitical changes is maybe at higher pace than ever before. So we're very happy to have this seminar to discuss what are the opportunities for this transformation, but also some of the challenges. And before introducing this amazing panel, just a few words about myself. My name is Sofia Östmark, and I will be guiding you through this seminar, which is organized by LO Sweden and Union to Union. And Union to Union, that is the joint organization of the Swedish unions. So it's both LO, TCO, and SACO, and their member organizations working on development cooperation in around 100 countries. So here we have an amazing panel, and we're very honored to have the Prime Minister of Sweden, Stefan Löfven, who was also co-chairing the Global Commission on the Future Work, together with the President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa. And the Commission was launched in August 2017, and the report was then released in January this year. The Commission consisted of about 25 commissioners representing different perspectives from academia, private sector, trade unions, and others. And in addition to the Prime Minister, we're also happy to have two of the commissioners here representing two different perspectives. So we have Christine Skogen Lund, who is the CEO of Schibsted Media Group, but before that you were also the Director General of the Norwegian Confederation of Enterprise. We also have Philip Jennings, who is the former Secretary General of Uni Global Union, which is one of the global union federations. And last but not least, we also have Karl-Petter Thorvaldsson, the president of LO, who we are also co-organizing this meeting with. And even though you were not part of the commission, you are of course very well placed to speak about this issue. So in addition to this amazing panel, we also have you in the audience who are very well acquainted with these issues, and we hope towards the end of this hour to come out to you for a few questions and comments. And with those short words of introduction, I should also mention that this seminar is being live streamed on YouTube, Facebook, and LO Play. And you're also encouraged to use Twitter, and we have a hashtag which is Brighter Future. So now, please, Mr. Prime Minister, I'll invite you to make the introductory comments.
Thank you. Thank you, Sofia. Thank you so much, and I would like to thank the Swedish Trade Union Confederation and Union to Union also for hosting this, I believe, very important seminar and for having us here. Have you heard the line, safety of wings? That was often used by ljusare, and I guess most of you have heard of him as a legend within LO. He was born about 100 years ago, just like the ILO, and in a time of great inequality and injustice, which he, just like ILO, spent his life fighting. Ljusare made a distinction between, on the one hand, safety of the shell, which shields from external dangers, and on the other hand, safety of the wings, which give the possibility to reach a better and safer place. And there's two different strategies. His main idea was that true safety for workers did not come from attempts to shield them from dangers of an open economy, but on the contrary, by giving them wings to reach higher ground. It has been an honor for me to work together with, of course, President Ramaphosa, and with so many great minds from all over the world, Christine Skogen Lund, Philip Jennings, and others. It's very good to see you both again today. And also to present our shared ideas on the future of work. I am convinced that our work has gained added strength from the fact that we represent trade unions, companies, societies, academia, and other actors. And that also that we have been able to find a win-win-win situation in this theme, because win-win-win is essential. It is crucial that individuals, workers, can see the benefits, but also that enterprises and employers can see the benefits of this future, and of course, the society. We can see the external dangers of today, which luckily for us also can be great opportunities if they are properly handled. We see, for example, the demographic trends that will affect migration flows and youth employment, will also demand the transformation of our social security and care systems. We see technological advances such as artificial intelligence, automation, robotics, that have the potential to fundamentally change the way we work. We see our climate threatened, which will require a just transition to environmentally sustainable societies, but also opens up for major opportunities for the creation of new green jobs. To put it short, we can see the higher ground that the workers of today and tomorrow will have to reach. And what we're really asking ourselves is really nothing more than this. How do we create wings so that each and every one of us can reach those new grounds that we need to reach? What we are proposing is a human-centered agenda to put the human beings in the very middle of this context. It is one that secures a universal entitlement to lifelong learning, something that enables people to acquire new skills, to reskill, to upskill. Also, that creates institutions to help people through an increasing number of labor market transitions over the course of their working lives. One that empowers women, promoting the sharing of unpaid work at home and also ensuring equal opportunities, that eliminates violence and harassment at work, ensures equal pay, and not least strengthens women's voice and leadership. It's an agenda that promotes a strong social protection system based on solidarity and risk sharing. An agenda that proposes a universal labor guarantee, giving fundamental rights to all workers all over the world, regardless of their contractual arrangements or employment status. An agenda that harnesses the power of technology and artificial intelligence to create decent jobs, always putting humans in ultimate control of these great tools. It's an agenda that promotes investment in decent jobs, developing the rural economy, for example, in ways that foster prosperity, sustainability and gender equality. And to make all this possible, we need to strengthen our collective representation and social dialogue to sustain social peace also in times of transition. We know that change will come, is coming, and we can see the broad perspective, we can see the broad picture, but we can never really in detail know what form it will take. And that is why social dialogue is crucial. And if we do this, if we follow through on this agenda, we will create the 21st century version of the safety of wings, making it possible for all of us to reach higher ground. So I look forward to advancing this work, making these ideas a reality, and I will carry with me a poem by Christopher Logue, which Philip Jennings has often referred to during our work. I hope I don't steal this from you now, but I want to use it because it's almost like Christopher Logue actually read what Gösta Rehn said, and this is a poem that would end with. Come to the edge, we might fall. Come to the edge, it's too high. Come to the edge. And they came, and he pushed, and they flew. And that is what we're talking about in this report. I'm very proud to have been part of that. Very proud to work with these two. He's got it prepared already. So I destroyed that part, but thank you very much. I look forward to the seminar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister, for that. And before turning to the other panelists, we also have a short video greeting from the Director General of the International Labour Organization, Mr. Guy Ryder, who couldn't be here with us today, unfortunately, but was very eager to send a video greeting to us. So hopefully the technique will work for this as well.
Mr. Prime Minister, President of the LO, dear Carl-Peter, Chairperson, dear Sophia, Global Commissioners, dear Christine and Philip, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. Firstly, allow me to thank you for holding this very important seminar on the report of the Global Commission. I'm very sorry that I cannot be with you in person today, but the ILO governing body has just begun its 2-week spring meeting, and that requires me to stay in Geneva for its duration. But I do look forward to being with all of our Nordic tripartite partners when they gather in Reykjavik next month. Colleagues, let me perhaps just provide a few words of context about what seems to me to be the significance of the Global Commission's report, beyond the substantive content of its recommendations. When the ILO decided 4 years ago to make the future of work the centrepiece of its centenary activities, I think that we were conscious that in so doing we were addressing some of the most pressing, some of the most urgent economic and social policy questions of our time. The issues covered in this report are the ones that truly matter to citizens, to families, to communities all around the world, and that also matter to our political leaders and decision makers. And so we've produced a report on issues that matter a great deal. And the ambition contained in this report is certainly very high, and unapologetically so. The Global Commission makes the point that its report marks only the beginning of a journey. But what does a roadmap for that journey forwards look like? For the International Labour Organization, of course, it will involve our tripartite constituents, governments, employers and workers in a very intensive process over the next year. We've invited all of our 187 member states to continue their active engagement in this process by taking the report back to their countries and engaging in tripartite discussion, which will enable them to come to our centenary conference in Geneva in June, ready to engage in the process that will result in what I hope will be an important centenary declaration on the future of work. Perhaps the key message in this report is that we all have the opportunity and the responsibility to renew and to reinvigorate the social contract that was at the foundation of the ILO. That idea, which may have seemed then to be before its time, the idea that the governments of the world, employers' representatives and workers' representatives, should join together to promote the cause of social justice in all of the world as the best guarantee of peace and stability. Now, that belief in the power of social dialogue inspired the Swedish social partners when they first reached that Saltsjöbaden agreement on collective bargaining as long ago as 1938. But we see it still today in the call of the Prime Minister Löfven for a global deal to highlight the potential of social dialogue to foster decent work, quality jobs, increased productivity and inclusive growth. And those ambitions, set 100 years ago, still speak to us very powerfully today, and they call us to our responsibilities. So it is the beginning of a very important journey, and let me conclude by adding a particular word of thanks to Prime Minister Stefan Löfven, firstly for the extraordinary leadership that he exercised as co-chair of our Global Commission, together with President Ramaphosa of South Africa, and secondly, for his continuing support for our work manifested in what he has said today. I wish you a very successful and productive seminar.
So I think that message was very clear, that it's about making the recommendation in the report that are very on a policy level, I would say, for those of you who had the opportunity to read it, to make it into the local context. And here in Sweden, we of course have a well-functioning social dialogue, but that's not the case in many other countries. But we're now turning the questions to the panelists, and we have heard now from the Prime Minister and from Mr. Ryder about the takeaways from the report. But Christine, we are eager to hear what are your main takeaways of the report, but also from the work of the Commission.
No, well, first of all, let me echo the praise for the leadership. And I don't say that just to be nice, but I was really admiring the two leaders for managing to get a group of 25 people who come from all over the world and from very different points of views and backgrounds to have such really fruitful and constructive discussions as we did the whole time. That was an experience in itself, and good to see that we were able to do that. I'll try to speak a bit from business point of view, since that was my role. I, at the time, represented the Norwegian Employers Organization, and now I run a business. And I think it's important to acknowledge that business is really changing. Business wants to be the solution to society's problems and not the cause of them. And I think that it's becoming more and more common that business sees that their only their success can not only be measured on the bottom line. I mean, there are more aspects to success than the pure profit of things. And when I took the job as CEO of Schibsted 3 months ago, and I was actually told specifically by the chairman that we will not measure you simply on the bottom line. And so what I have heard about in the organizational world was really what I was met with in the, let's say, the real business world. And I was very happy to see that. And that those principles, at least as far as I have experienced it, they're kept very high. And I think not only do business need to behave properly, but we need to have a purpose that is larger than ourselves and the profits. And I think we are also in a phase today where if you don't have that, you will simply have problems attracting the right talent and do well as a business. And I want to start out by saying that because in the Commission, we sourced some inspiration from the work that our previous Prime Minister Brundtland did in the Commission on Sustainability. And back then they were discussing environmental issues and how and pretty much introduced this concept of sustainability. And they very quickly acknowledged that we have to make sure that business interests are aligned with the interest of combating climate change, because if you don't make those forces go together, if you make them oppose each other, you simply won't be able to achieve the solution. So to draw that parallel over to this work is that we need in a better way to align the interest of business and the market with this human-centric agenda. And they must not be allowed to be opposites. They must reinforce each other. And that's where we come into this thing of how we are incentivized and how we measure things, which we also had interesting discussions on in the Commission, because it is a paradox that employing people, educating people, now that lifelong learning is becoming ever more important, all these things are classified as costs. You know, they're not classified as investments, they are costs, and all business try to avoid cost, right? And you have the paradox that in other things, like, for example, polluting is not necessarily seen as a cost. You know, so we need to rethink how we measure and value things. And it goes not only for the examples I mentioned, it also goes for in a digital world where all our measurements are based on physical production or delivery of services. How do we account for the large multinational now that accumulate so much power and so much wealth and so much dominance, and they don't pay tax and they don't contribute the way they should? So we have a parallel problem in the business world from what we have in, let's say, the people's world, because we talk a lot about how inequality is on the rise, and we see how it creates social tension, even in Europe, right? But you have, in a way, a parallel situation in the business world, because if these multinational companies amass more and more of the wealth, and they hardly employ people compared to the wealth they generate, they have very few employees, then the local and smaller companies who cannot tax plan and avoid, taxes and etc., they end up with a whole burden of the welfare state, and that's not sustainable. So we have a parallel universe in business that we need to pay attention to if we want to make sure that we can uphold our systems of welfare that we cherish, so much as we do. So I think I'll stop now, but I just wanted to point out those issues from. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that also from the point of view of business, we are very interested in promoting a human-centric agenda where we have the right alignment between business and what's good for people, and we need to align within business so that we have a sustainable and fair playing field for all types of business, local as well as multinational.
Yeah. No, thank you, Christine, for highlighting that and creating that level playing field where everyone competes on the same kind of conditions as well. And going to the trade union perspective, which was the one that Philip represented in the commission, from your perspective, what were your main takeaways, not only from the maybe conclusions of the report, but also the actual work? I mean, it's not always the product that matters, but actually the process to the product as well.
No. This was much more than a takeaway. This is a food wagon. It is full of brilliant ideas ready to be taken up. But first of all, let me thank Stefan for the time that he took and for the guidance to lead a choir that had as many sopranos as we had bass, not always singing to the same hymn sheet. It may have sounded more like a John Cage music than a Welsh choir. And can I also congratulate him on his sense of productivity? Because Gro Brundtland took 4 years to write her report, and we got the job done in just 1. And her executive... Thank you very much. Round of applause, please. It's always good to get a round of applause for the productivity. Thank you. And I would also like to say that the executive summary of Gro Brundtland's report is longer than the report itself. And that was always a criteria. We were against this wall that this report should not be unmanageable. This is the 170th anniversary of the publication of Charles Dickens' novel, The Tale of Two Cities. So having lost the opportunity of talking about Let's All Go and Fly, I'll find a new opportunity to celebrate Charles Dickens. And at the opening of the book, he says, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the winter of despair, and it was the spring of hope." From the despair of workers around the world at the current situation of the labor market that confronts so many billions of workers, we see this report as a spring of hope. Now, it's very clear, this report, labor is not a commodity. Now, just reflect on that for a while, and what does that mean? Labor is not a commodity. The report is very bold. It says, a change of direction is required. No business as usual, because if it is business as usual, we'll see a continuation of the difficulties. It talks about a reinvigorated social contract, not some new fantasy model, but a reinvigorated social contract. This commissioner, and I think with Cyril and with Stefan, listen to the voice, not just of the commissioners, but what's the message of working people from around the world. And this is why this is so important, this idea of human-centered, because we've been financially centered, market-centered, financial gain-centered, tomorrow doesn't matter centered for too long in the setting of priorities. And it says in the report, we call for a new approach that puts people and the work they do at the center of public policy and business practice. At the center of public policy and business practice. I think in the current context, this is a very profound statement, and I think it will become as important and as quoted as the Gro Brundtland's report on sustainability. Behind this message is the demand for a new growth model. In the Commission, we spoke a lot about what does a new growth model look like? And if you have a human-centered growth model, it surely takes us beyond GDP. That when we have a growth model based on inclusivity, does not mean that you have economic failure. And that healthy societies are a requirement also for business to thrive. So I know I will talk about some of the granular stuff, but this bigger picture question of trying to find a new growth paradigm, a new growth model, sustainable, inclusive, human-centered, which can also then prevail in the center of economic policy making, because we felt on the union side, I'm not talking about the Nordic area here, that work as a central cause of political consideration was being pushed to the margins. And that collective bargaining had lost its way somewhat, and that we were considered as unions legacy organizations. And right at the beginning of the process, there was a seminar to set up the ILO Commission to kind of see the feeling. And one of the panelists looked at me and said, Jennings, you had your day. It's gone. And therefore, you know, when this is said in such a bold manner, that emboldens you and it encourages you to try and develop what a new agenda looks like. The Commission was anxious about gender inequality, anxious about wealth inequality and income inequality, about growing informalization, about the closing of democratic spaces around the world, and climate change. But it also made it very clear there was a danger that this was happening so fast that people were being left behind and the policymakers were being left behind. So I think there's a very clear message in this report, which filters down from the basic theme, which I think is exciting and realistic. There's a message to Uberization, a universal labor guarantee, that the employment relationship is still key to our labor laws and the way that we do things, that work is not going to collapse. And we took, well, you can imagine what I said in the group, but this idea of misclassifying people out of an employment relationship into something else, and then they fall through the floor of labor rights, social insurance, and so forth. So there's this idea of the universal labor guarantee, which I'm sure will spark some thought. There was a message to Uber, to Silicon Valley, pay your taxes. There was worry about the concentration of 3 companies being the new dominant force for all of data and all of that means for our economy, our society, our politics, and so forth. Also, this human in control, it's just one sentence, Stefan. One sentence, humans in command, was a question mark about the direction of AI and the biases that are contained in it. A message to Wall Street about the disadvantage of the short-term pressures that Christine and all those entrepreneurs find themselves under. Every quarter, you've got to produce another miracle. Does this get in the way of a human-centered approach? I think so. And then there's a message to the business community about sensitivity community, as Christine has mentioned, about having a sense of purpose, a sense of a stakeholder, and the profit maximization alone has kind of had its day. So when we dig into the sort of more policy substance, there's a strong dimension on rights, on decent work and dignity, the universal labor guarantee. But it says something very important for all of us who have been confronted with this argument that collective bargaining and so forth has had its day. The only way that labor is not a commodity is if you have all those employment rules, if you have collective bargaining agreements, if you have social dialogue. And this report gives a really strong following wind to this idea that at the end of the day, this is a public good and not a cost. So I thought that was important. Opportunity, lifelong learning, a new employment insurance guarantee, the ability to be prepared and to hold and to accompany people through the transition in a participative way. Universal social protection is mentioned in there. Again, just one sentence We need to invest more in our wage-setting institutions and to invest once again in what does a proper wage-setting mechanism look like when collective bargaining has been weakened in so many places. We talk about active labour market policies based on the evidence that in the OECD, the average OECD spend on active labour market policies is 0.54% of GMP. So there's a structural problem here. And then, of course, the idea about, well, where are the jobs of tomorrow going to be? And there's a good part in the report which looks at care economy, the green economy, the investment in the infrastructure and good quality public services, which can add hundreds of millions of jobs to our world's workforce. Also, there's a very strong point on time sovereignty of working people, which for me, coming from a country where there's almost 1 million people on 0 hours contracts, where they don't know when they're going to work, how they're going to work, or what they're going to get paid. When the Commission says that workers' desire should have the certainty of the hours and the guarantee of their hours, I think that's very possible. And then finally, it ends with a warning that if we don't change, we're sleepwalking to a disaster. And therefore, this boldness of the clarity of the message that labour is not a commodity, that these collective institutions are a public good, that if we can change the sense of purpose of business to embrace this idea of a broader goal, that if we can say to all workers, we'll give you a job of dignity, that you will have a basic understanding of what your rights at work are. And then what we have to do now is to take all of this into Silicon Valley, to the Amazons, to the Apples, to the Facebooks, and all the rest of them, for them to get this message that there's a brighter future of work, even at the heights of the economy, for all, with a reinvigorated social contract.
Thank you, Philip, for that passionate speech, as always. And I think you also draw some of the conclusions from the report very clearly. But going to Carl Petter, I mean, you were not part of the work of the Commission, but you have read the report and also have had discussions around the conclusion of it. So what's your take, and how do you think that we should take these overarching conclusions forward?
First of all, you understand, everybody, it's a nightmare to come after Philip Jennings in school English after this brilliant speaker. Really, I must just first say that ILO is a fantastic organization. Not that they are successful every day, not every second decade, but 100 years of cooperation and tripartite negotiations of making life better for ordinary people. It was actually founded by one of Stefan's predecessors, Hjalmar Branting, who was the Prime Minister in Sweden at that time. He spent a month, went there and negotiated ILO 100 years ago. So I think it's also a very good step forward, Stefan, to take that torture. Yeah. And also the wonderful thinking about the Prime Minister could leave the country for a month to negotiate. But I know you will be gone for 18 hours to have negotiations on Brexit. So it's really tough these days. And also, of course, what you heard from the panel is trade union poetry, that we have tripartite negotiation discussions about future work. I mean, just the idea to celebrate 100 years about talking about the future of work is, of course, fantastic. And I think actually we have a model from the Nordic countries that are well sold out in the world. And it's actually more and more countries coming here to see what we are doing in the Nordic countries. And it's benefits everybody. I used to say that the best thing I can say as a trade union leader of Sweden is that the Nordic countries, we have the highest low salary in the world. That's trade union poetry, promise. The highest low salary in the world. But on the same time, all the Nordic countries are very competitive. Of course, Sweden is first, 7th place, and Norway second on 11th place. But all of us is in the top of the world of competitiveness, same time as we have high, low salary in all the Nordic countries. And the reason is obvious, is social dialogue, that actually both employer and workers gain of negotiations, collective bargaining, and good deals. And we've tried to do that in Sweden for a little more than 100 years, and we are quite successful. So a lot of things in the Swedish society, new problems to Swedish society, are actually solved by negotiation between employer and trade unions. And I think especially the universal labor guarantee is something really good for trade unions worldwide, because we are, as you know, in many countries in big stress, and they call it 1 week for platform economy and next week bogus self-employed. There are many names, but they are all a name of the same thing: to have workers cheaper than we had before, and to have workers more flexible than we had before, but with less security for the individual worker. So have a universal labor guarantee, I think, will be a starting point also for companies to compete on a level playing field. So you can't avoid taxes, even though you call yourself Uber and you have the driver, of course, have the service from a computer. But what's the big difference if you have the service from a computer than from a telephone booth in some island outside Stockholm? It's no difference for the worker, but directly you should have lower salary and you have no guarantee for social service. And the Swedish society lost a lot of tax revenue. Now we have good cooperation between authorities and trade unions in Sweden. So most of that tax avoidance we have been able to take away. But still, we have a lot of people working in so-called informal sector also in Sweden that we need to tackle. And I think the universal labor guarantee is really the way forward. This summer, it will be a celebration in Geneva. And we hope that this will be put into a declaration, a joint declaration between government, trade union and employers. So we can bring this good report to a declaration where we can start to work with it in every member country. Still, of course, it's difference between having a job in Europe or OECD countries and in so-called developing countries. And I was in Kenya a couple of weeks ago, and obviously we are talking about completely different start, but the same things that happens here happens there. When they have collective bargainings, when they start to have increase of salaries, when they start to have a social insurance system, a lot of companies will go into informal sector and actually destroying valid companies and also destroying living conditions for ordinary workers. So the task is the same all over the world. And I think ILO this summer could take a big step forward in the joint declaration on the future of work. I think you've done a fantastic job. So this is trade union poetry globally.
Thank you, Carl-Petter. And then maybe going back to the Prime Minister, now we heard that one of the important things in the report is a well-functioning social dialogue and a social contract. But at the same time, we see challenges development around the world, both politically, but also in terms of trade union density and the number of people that are organized in trade unions all over the world and in employer organizations. So how should we kind of reach that well-functioning social dialogue in the political changes that we see, and also in terms of decline of trade unions around the world? What is the secret to make this happen?
I believe we touched upon it several times already now. It's about a win-win-win situation. You need to see from not only the workers' perspective, but also from the enterprise and the employers and the whole societies, that this is the way forward. We lack about around the globe now 500 million jobs need to be created. Yeah. Now, if we do that, everybody understands that would create more possibility of wealth, because people working equals to wealth if we distribute it in the right way, if we pay taxes, of course. So that we have some 300 million workers that they are working, but living in extreme poverty. Not only poverty, but extreme poverty. And everybody understands on the same line that Carl-Petter was talking about. If you raise wages and you can live under decent conditions, they will also contribute in the economy. If you're extreme if you live in extreme poverty, you cannot contribute. You have the day-to-day life. You cannot invest. You cannot purchase, and you cannot contribute in the economy. So I think the major issue is here to see that this is a win-win-win. It's not workers winning over enterprises or employers, because we have a mutual responsibility and mutual interest in this growing. The same goes with the society as a whole. So I think we need to start there. But it's crucial, and that is why I also spent a lot of time working with this global deal, because I genuinely believe that what we have achieved in the Nordic countries and other countries as well is to find a way to go forward in a decent way. And knowing that if we can find those solutions together, that will be that's the best path we can find. So one example, one more concrete example, is women participation in the labor market. If in European Union women would have the same employment rate as men, we would increase the GDP by 12%. 12%, that's a lot. That's a lot of resources to also distribute among people. So we need to, that social dialogue is so crucial to find like-minded, enterprises, employers, trade unions, other actors, societies, governments, and others, and to see how do we find this common path forward. And the other perspective of it is, of course, if we can do that, we would ease the tensions within the society. But if we go the wrong path, we would increase tensions. We would have more social unrest, and that is something that nobody really wants. So I'm not saying this is easy, but piece by piece, bit by bit, we now have 100 organizations, employers, trade unions, and others in the global deal, and we want to work with it. It's now situated at OECD. Their task is now to bring this forward, to see what can we do just to. So social dialogue is, I think, is one of the keys.
Thank you. And before opening up for a few comments from the floor, I wanted to take the opportunity also to ask you, Christine. We heard about the win-win-win opportunity and also about the multi-stakeholder gathering you had in the Commission. And there seems to be a lot of agreement, both from the business side, that this is good business. But were there certain issues in the Commission and in the work in the Commission that were harder to agree on than others? Were there complicated factors, or were there generally an agreement on the way forward?
No, the discussions were really good and constructive. Almost surprisingly so. I think maybe what happened a bit towards the end was that some special interests were thrown in at the end, which maybe made some others freeze up a little bit. And I think to the degree we had problems, we didn't really have problems, but it's more like some of the issues we speak about are just so different depending on whether you are a poor farmer in India or whether you are a pretty well-off worker in the Nordics, Like, take time sovereignty. At least in Norway, we want the people who today work part-time to work more, and so does the unions, right? So it's almost like an opposite time sovereignty issue, while of course in many other countries that's just not the case. So some of these subjects are dependent upon the environment. I think that to some certain degree were an issue at times, but all in all, I think we managed quite well. And of course, I guess we also have to say that on in the last hours there, you end up rounding it off a bit so that maybe some of the boldness get lost, because when everyone has to agree, you do have to lower your aspirations somehow a little bit.
Why are you looking at me?
But I still believe we came to a very good result.
Well, that's good to hear. It's good to hear that it was a good discussion. I want to have the time for a few questions from the floor before handing back to the panels again. Is there questions or comments that anyone wants to raise? You have the opportunity now. Nothing? Monica. State your name and your question.
I will, thank you. I'm Monica Arvidsson, acting head of the international department here at LO. I see a potential perfect match. The Prime Minister, you were involved in Global Deal, which is now a competence of the OECD. And now we have the Global Commission's report that is within the work of the ILO. How do you see the potential of these two working together and enforcing each other?
Please.
No, I do think they can work together, but should work together, because this global deal is, as I said, just specifically about increasing social dialogue, strengthening social dialogue, and it's one thing to talk about social dialogue in northern countries of Europe. Totally different rural workers in India, as you mentioned. That's totally different worlds. But you have to start somewhere, and also the Nordic labor movement and the employers started somewhere. So it's about the awareness. But I think definitely by strengthening social dialogue, you would also, of course, strengthen this perspective and support the result, the content of this report, definitely.
We have a question here in the front.
My name is Ivar Andersson. I'm a journalist with Arbetet. I've followed the work with the report with great interest. And as Mr. Jennings said, I think some of the conclusions are very bold. I would like to ask, however, a lot of trade unionists I know would argue that, for instance, the concessions that your own party had to make in order to achieve a working government would point in the opposite direction from the conclusions in the report. If the conclusions and recommendations in the report, if you're not able to sort of make them reality in Sweden, how are you going to go about doing this globally?
Before handing over to the panel, we have one last question from the lady in the blue suit.
Lady in blue.
Hello, thank you for a very interesting panel. My name is Sara Övreby and I'm representing Google here in Sweden. I would like to know, in addition on your views on our tax payments, what would be the most valuable contribution that we could practically make to make this a reality? Because the future work issue is a very important issue to us. Thank you.
So, Mr. Prime Minister, I don't know whether you want to start with both of those questions, maybe? The easy?
Yes, sure, I can do that. The future work is a report about developing the labor market in such a way that everybody benefits from the global economy. That's not the case today. That doesn't mean that the aims of this report will be reached in 1 year or not 2 years. It will take some time. So you need to keep your eye fixed on the long-term goal, the long-term aims. But you also have to act now today to see how do you get closer to that goal. We had a choice in January here in Sweden. I had a choice as a party leader. Either I take this opportunity to form a government and put in place a program, a deal that brings with the part of what I want to achieve. More resources to the wealth, to our local communities, our local authorities, better pensions, more resources to training, education, and so on, so on. More resources to schools, to wealth, and so on. And to that, bring also a compromise, meaning that the other parties in this agreement also get part of their policies. Or I sit in one corner and the other parties in their corners, and we say, we all want exactly what we want ourselves and nothing else. And that would have meant a standstill in Swedish politics. Nothing would have happened. I could also have chosen the easy path and saying, well, this is too difficult. I have to make a compromise. I have to admit that other parties also have a saying in this. But that's too hard for me. So I will let the conservative government, a right-wing government, supported also by an extremist party, they can take this scene. They can do this. I allow them to. I would prefer them to get into the government, knowing at that time that while we are now starting a negotiation, also about the labor market conditions and the rules on the labor market, where we can put in our perspective. If I hadn't done that, I would have given this to the conservative government, the right-wing government, knowing that those negotiations would never take part because the trade unions will never be invited even close to negotiation. So you have to keep your eyes on the long term, but you also need to act here and now and make a choice. And if I can get 51% in an election in the future, I would be in a better position to decide on my own. But as long as I do not have 51%, I also need to be able and pragmatic and to compromise. That's the short answer. It wasn't short.
Not of your own.
Not of my own. But and to go, yes, of course, to bring in all the partners, and I mean the most pragmatic way in a company, in an enterprise, is of course that's social dialogue, and to see that all these human beings they deserve a good treatment. I'm not saying that you do not see that now, but that's the main point. But it also, from the workers' perspective, also need to be a responsibility. Of course, this is a two-way street, so everybody have to contribute. But to see, I think Christine put it well, not to see everything as a cost. It's an investment. Training is an investment, and if you can ease the path forward for the employees, I mean, some of them will perhaps be, there will be transitions in the labor market. And if you've eased that path for your employees and all the other enterprises, the whole labor market will function in a much more efficient way, of course. So that is one thing of looking at the individuals, giving them the strength to handle also a transition that will happen eventually.
Philip, a short comment on the Google.
I would like Google to become a part of the global deal. And I think that would be a great step forward, as I would like Facebook to be a part of the global deal, and above all, Amazon to be a part of the global deal. Because the situation that we are in is a complete antithesis to what this report is talking about and what the Prime Minister has been mentioning. No sense of dialogue and workers suffering. So I think with the global deal idea for Google would be a step in the right direction. I recall this person that called me that said that strikes were a legacy and unions were a legacy, and you made the world stand up. The workers of Google made the world stand up when 30,000 people went on strike for fundamental issues about discrimination, about fairness at work, about a voice at work. And therefore, I hope that spirit within Google can continue, and that it develops, and that then when Google faces the world as much as it does, can become a global deal kind of organization and can be working in consistency with the messages and the principles of the ILO. There's never a better time. I don't think there's anything to be frightened of, frankly. I know in the United States of America, I've just returned from the United States of America, where the labor situation is very different. But then, an opinion poll survey was done, and they've never seen numbers like it of people who now view the unions in a positive way. And also another survey was done that 50 million American 50% of those interviewed, we're talking about 58 million American workers, would join a union today. But if you look at the obstacles put in their way, then it requires reform. And therefore, to find that balance and to find that brighter future, you have to go. We are here celebrating the centenary of the ILO. The ILO was a product of a war that cost millions of lives. The rebirth of the ILO after the Second World War was a product of forces that never wanted to see fascism, extremism, and discrimination to the nature that we saw. And therefore now the world is on the edge. And this is one of the great challenges that we all face. This rise of hatred, this rise of this discrimination that we see, whether it's on religious or ethnic grounds or whatever. So I think this, the reason why the ILO came out of this fire of pain and death and suffering. And therefore it should be seen as a kind of a beacon for all of us as to there's another way. And what this report is trying to do is to rekindle that flame, to relight that flame and say there is another way and you can win and you can win and you can win. And that includes Google.
Thank you, Philip. I know Carl-Petter and Christine also want to comment on that before I hand over any final words from the panelists as well. So short comments from the two of you.
I agree with Philip 100%. We welcome Google to Sweden, and we actually talking about them about a huge investment in Avesta. So hopefully you do that very soon. And we also have had meeting here at LO with Amazon and also with Facebook. And so far, on every construction work have been done by Amazon and Google and Facebook, have been done with collective bargaining agreements as a Swedish model in force here when we're doing job in Sweden. And of course they are most welcome to Sweden. And the business model could be whatever you want, but in Sweden we do things with collective bargaining agreements. So if you do that, no problem. Then you have a business model that is also quite problematic for newspapers. We had a meeting about that, and obviously that is a difficult question, how to find resources for local media when Google and Facebook are taking such a big proportion of ads and especially I think printed papers in countryside Sweden have suffered a lot. So that is, but you have to be congratulated that your business model is better. So we can't say that you are competing wrongly. You're doing exactly what you should do as a company. But we need to find resources to have local reporters, newspapers, and journalists also in the future. So that is a completely different discussion we need to have also with Google.
Thank you, Carl-Petter. Christine, if you want to comment on that, as well as give any final words of send-off to the audience or recommendations or how we should take these issues forward.
Sure. In general, you mean?
In general,
yeah. Okay, yeah.
So both of you.
Just quickly on Google, since we own some of those newspapers, I'm happy you said it, so I don't speak for my own cause. But it's back to what I said about measurement, because Google has done incredibly well, and the digital world is so that the winner takes it all. One, becomes the monolith. And you have become that monolith, and that's your success. But with that type of market power comes huge responsibility. And the trouble is that our systems say that or thinks that sort of Google is free, right? So that's so it's considered to be free, but actually it's paid for by data, which is incredibly valuable. But it means that you thrive off that currency of data, which is then does not give income to the people who give away their data, and it does not give income to the states who need to fund their welfare systems. And that's maybe not your fault, but unless you actually actively try to contribute to this finding some other system of measurement and contribution, I think you're going to run into problems in the end, because it will not be accepted going forward. And unfortunately, when politicians try to regulate this, it's very difficult to do so. For example, GDPR end up hampering the local media companies, and it favors the mastodons because they are so big anyway that they can manage all this data within their own universe, while for the small ones, they can't really trade in data anymore. So often regulation doesn't work because it's not understood the effects it will have. So this is complicated, but I think it's great that you ask, and I know that Google actually really wants to be constructive, so that is a very good thing. If I am to send you off with a message, I would say that during my 6 years as head of the Norwegian Employers Organization, I really learned that the very good solutions, they are when you strike the right balance in a compromise. And if we win, or if we lose, like you said, it's not about that. But if that happens, you end up one way or the other down the road, you end up in a conflict, or you end up in court, or you end up with some unbalance that needs to be adjusted. So you might as well try to strive to strike the balance from the start, because those are the good and sustainable solutions. And I think the future of social dialogue will be a lot stronger if all parties in it could be really make the effort of striking the balance, which means compromise. It means employers can't have it their way, and unions can't have it their way. You really need to find that common ground. I think that's very, very important. And we need to renew ourselves, and we need to make sure that we take care not only of the people who are already within our systems, but that we also fight for policies that will include more people who are currently outside, let's say, the protection of our system. We need to reach out to them and make sure they are invited into the benefits that we represent. I think that's the way going forward.
Very important message. So in the interest of time, I will now give the last final comments to the Prime Minister. What's your kind of message to the audience and to the ones also listening and watching online?
Now, first, I would like to say thank you very much for hosting this seminar, and thank you, Christine and Philip and Carl-Petter, for your contributions. I very much share what Christine said about striking the balance, and that is, I guess, the task that I've chosen in my life, because I think it's so important, because that brings us forward in the best way. But I'll use another perspective, and that is human-centered. We need to recognize once and for all that we're all human beings, that we're all striving for the best possible life. And the best way of achieving that is to help one another, to try to support one another. And it goes for the enterprises, companies, of course, societies as a whole. Not everybody, very few people can get whatever they want. But in a relationship between an employee and an employer, I think that there's a huge possibility in finding that balance that you talked about. And that the best result will be when we can find a common path. It will always be a compromise. That's always the right path. But to understand that the results in the companies and the enterprises and in the public sector, wherever we are, the result is created by human beings. Human beings. And if we give human beings the best possible conditions, then we will have the best possible result. Once again, it cannot mean that everybody can have exactly what they want, but to see there is a possibility to improve my life. I have a place in this future project that called the global economy, whatever it calls. I have a place here. That's the best thing that we can give to the people.
Thank you very much for those important words. And thank you, Prime Minister, panelists, for this very inspiring discussion. And we continue to discuss these issues here and in other places as well. I know Carl-Petter has a gift to all the panelists, which is also a very nice one. Yeah. So,
you know, there have been a lot of new interest of the Swedish model. So I was really pleased last autumn when a reporter from Financial Times, interviewed me and other leaders of trade unions and companies in Sweden. And actually, I didn't find the name of this report. It's in a book. It's called The Bumblebee Nation, The Hidden Story of the New Swedish Model. It's very interesting. So here you can read 500 pages about the Swedish model. Yeah. I mean, it's a Bible. Yeah. So thank you very much for coming to Hello.
Thank you all the audience as well.
Tack så jättemycket.
Tack.